Welcome to the Firebelly Social Show. We're focused on talking to food and beverage brands that are on a mission to make the world better.
Hey, everyone. Duncan here with another episode of the Firebelly Social Show, where we chat with founders and leaders of mission-driven food and beverage brands. And thank you, everyone, for tuning into yet another episode of the Firebelly Social Show. We have a great show lined up for you today, talking to Shahreen Reza, CEO and co-founder of Astreas. Today's episode is brought to you by Firebelly Marketing. At Firebelly, we help mission-based food and beverage brands bring people closer together through social media. So if you're ready to talk about social media to create more community and excitement around your brand, go to firebellymarketing.com to talk, and we'll take it from there. So with no further ado, I'm so excited to welcome Shahreen. She is a serial entrepreneur, literally has started and helped several organizations thrive. She started with Palantir Technologies, and her first startup, PurifAid, was a CleanTech water company, and we'll get into that. And now, after much education, and she's so highly accomplished, she has launched a new company, Astreas, which we're going to get into. So welcome to the show, Shahreen. I'm so happy to have you.
Hi, Duncan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited to tell you and the world a little bit more about Astreas.
Excellent. Let's get into it. What is it, and how did you decide to do it?
Well, I was actually working at Palantir at the time, and one of the things I loved about the concept of Palantir is right now we're in the world where AI and machine learning is all the rage. One of our core theses back then was you can't just give everything to a machine, it's pairing with the human brain. And I'm always very fascinated by the functioning performance of the human brain, but I'm also driven by pleasure, because I think for us to accomplish anything with great prowess, one needs to find joy in it. I was really looking at what it would take for an astronaut to thrive in space. And the reason we landed on astronaut is because they are in their peak performance, both in terms of mental acuity, as sharp as though they were surgeons, and in terms of physical performance, as though they were Olympians. And so the idea was, at the core, begin with creating the ultimate space food company that really fuels astronauts to thrive in space. And we looked at that concept, and really at the end of the day, an astronaut is the superhuman of what it means to be on Earth. So we are a company that designs products for astronauts, but at the core, it's really for elite performers within all of us to bring out the best that we can, pairing performance with pleasure and food that gives you joy, but also helps you boost up your energy.
I mean, that is the last thing I would have expected to hear about food for astronauts, and yet it is at its core what is most essential about food. Food is a joyful shared experience that is meant to nourish you. And all the movies that you watch about space exploration, it's like they're always eating like powdered food or something out of a packet that looks absolutely unappealing.
Oh, I know. And I love that you reference films, because I'm such a film buff and I love sci-fi. And yet anytime you have space, it's some dystopic idea of what food would be. And at the core, when we talk about food, it's really what brings us all together. We had the joy of interviewing so many astronauts when we were doing our research for the company. And one of our advisors, Greg Shamathoff, he's also Canadian, and he was the one who first brought bagels up to space. And the idea is, food is something that brings people together, and it doesn't matter what your race, religion, ethnic politics are. None of that counts. You just come together and you break boundaries, and food is really a way to just take any source of friction and stabilize it. So for us, when we looked at food, it is the ultimate fuel, not just for your brain, but also for the soul. And I really love the idea of performance food, because we want something that sets you up to succeed in your day. Whoever you are, we all have very demanding lives. And Astreas is there. It's a high-end chocolate truffle. So think of it as a sphere that you just plug in with your day and you're ready to soar.
That's phenomenal. The whole concept of brain food, I think, is unfamiliar to most people. I mean, even in their daily lives, they eat salmon, but they don't know why they eat salmon. Or if they're vegetarian, they're not eating anything for their brains. I mean, that is a vital part of your mission, to give astronauts and elite performance individuals food for their brain as well as their body.
Absolutely. And when we talk about food for the brain, it really does branch out to being both a combination of a lot of amazing vitamins. So, for example, in Astreas, we looked at the HRP roadmap for key deficiencies, and you have a lot of micronutrient deficiencies. So, vitamin D, for example, is very, very critical. But then we also have B6, B12, folate. And we realized that in addition to key micronutrients, you also have nootropics and adaptogens, things like lion's mane mushroom, which we incorporate into our ingredients, as well as acetylcholine. And these enable your brain to just have a greater sense of focus and mental alertness. The Japanese have been using lion's mane mushroom for centuries. In addition to that, while we all know about caffeine, there is another sense of balance that comes from L-theanine, which is white tea. And so instead of just being jittery, you have a focus that is stable and calm, and you can just plug in. So when it comes to brain food, it's interesting because we need to focus on our work. But even if you're an athlete, even if you're going out for your bike ride, there's an element of mindfulness where you perform, but then you're in the flow. So Scott, our COO, he is not just an astronaut, but also a doctor himself and a former Olympic coach. And he talks about being in the flow and just having your mind set where you can accomplish anything, because oftentimes mind over body. And I think the most critical thing about food is you want it to do more to you than just deliver the base to live.
That's phenomenal. I mean, and I want to make sure I emphasize that your co-founder Scott and your CEO Perezinski, just to emphasize for our audience that he is, I think it's kind of like being an Olympian, right? Once you're an Olympian, you're always an Olympian. He's an astronaut, always an astronaut, and is part of this. And the fact that you're thinking about all these various aspects of food, the micronutrients, the joy, and you mentioned nootropics and adaptogens. Let's talk about that a little bit. And lion's mane is a phenomenal mushroom that is only sort of now gaining some momentum in the West.
Absolutely. Yes. What's so interesting about nootropics and adaptogens is they've been around for a very, very long time. And I think being in California, a lot of people are aware of them. The simplest way is think of them as brain food. So it's just going to ensure that your brain is optimized. What I really love is when we have early adopters of our product. So one of my favorites is a cycling coach. His name's Thomas Chappell, and he tried Astreas, loved it, and he could feel the performance element when he'd go on these long bike rides. And so I call him an evangelist because then he started to pull together other cyclists. And Cliff Bar was one of the products that was originally adapted by cyclists because they could feel that they had that boost to their energy. We like to take things one step further. Why not give you a product that you genuinely enjoy eating? And so to take away the idea of guilt and instead say, look, here's chocolate. It's an exquisite truffle, but it also gives you a sense of performance. And being based here in California, we understand good food. And that's why our chocolatier, Michael Ricciuti, is based in San Francisco. He creates food where the taste itself is something you want to come back to time and time again. So our product is made from Valrhona dark chocolate, which is from France. I'm a complete Francophile, and I love the best European chocolates. But we wanted to make sure everything has a very clean label. So we use avocado oil. We're now incorporating algae oil. It's entirely vegan. But the flavor is enhanced by creating an element of texture. So then you have the creaminess of the ganache inside. And that's really where we have all of the multivitamins, all of the nootropics. But in addition to that, the outside coating for us, we want to have a sense of satiety when you're eating it. So we're putting in cocoa nibs. We're putting in sunflower seeds, puffed amaranth. And as you may know, amaranth is something very ancient. It's a grain that we've known throughout the years. And for us, bring it back to the origins of food. Make it as whole as possible, as delicious as possible, but convenient. Because I think convenience is what we all need. We don't have time to just breathe, so plug in.
I mean, so many thoughts. I mean, for one thing, I love that you said that let's get past the guilt, right? Because chocolate doesn't have to be about guilt. It has like natural values that are great, but you're adding all these things in there in a bioavailable format. So that is phenomenal. And the fact that you've also trained at Cordon Bleu and your colleague, Michael Ricciuti, has just been recently named the top chocolatier in the United States, I think you said.
So Michael Ricciuti, he has his own chocolate company, Ricciuti Confections, and it is ranked time and time again by New York Times as best boxed chocolates. And so he sells exquisite truffles. For us, our pairing is to then introduce an element of functionality to truffles. So that's what he's doing with Astreas. Myself, interestingly enough, I was actually a graduate student at Sciences Po in Paris, where I had amassed enough external scholarship money to then also pursue Cordon Bleu. And I very quickly realized that an authentic French chef doesn't go to Cordon Bleu. They actually train at stagiaires and they work their way up. So I broke a lot of rules at Cordon Bleu and got into a bit of trouble. And I realized that I don't like doing things the traditional way. So I had the great joy of also having a stage at an amazing bistro in Paris called Chez Marcel. It's owned by a chef from Lyon, which is where the authentic French food is from. And then I also did an apprenticeship here in Northern California with an amazing chef, Sachin Chopra, and that's at Allspice, which is a Michelin star restaurant. So while I decided verily that being a chef is not for me because it requires a completely different lifestyle, I wanted to take the highest quality food and bring it to all of us in a more convenient way so that we can eat it every day, plugs in, and then you're set for the day. What's so important with Astreas is we don't want it as something that you just kind of gobble down, but take a moment to yourself. Have that element of, hey, I'm good, I'm set, and go. Because there are so many times where if you're a mother or a doctor or, running from corporate meeting to corporate meeting, you just need that moment to yourself. And that's what we deliver with Astreas.
I mean, I want to say that I think I want to talk just a bit, take a little aside to your work with the water company. And most people don't know that I think it's the single largest human contamination event is in Bangladesh with the arsenic in the water table.
Yes, yes. Well, for me, it was really interesting because I was actually a graduate student at Sciences Po when we were given a challenge by the Boston Consulting Group. And the idea behind it was India has a booming whiskey industry. Here's a marketing challenge. How can you get the Scottish whiskey industry to one up the Indian whiskey industry? And while I was doing the research, I discovered there was a mad scientist in the Scottish Highlands. Her name's Lee Cassidy. At the time, she was a PhD student. And she found a way of using the byproduct of whiskey to decontaminate industrially polluted water. So I called her, flew over there. For the challenge itself, my team decided that the positioning was far too out there and they didn't go with it, but I was quite keen on whether or not her technology could actually decontaminate industrially poisoned water and arsenic poisoned water. And turns out that it was very, very successful in removing arsenic from the water. And so that really was the catalyst to my first startup. And in that experience, I learned what it means to have a tremendous team of people who are incredibly talented that have the full 360 view of what it means to take on a challenge. Something I learned, though, is everyone likes things that are pretty and functional and easy. So in Bangladesh, not only does it have the worst case of poisoning in terms of arsenic coming into the water, the origins of it actually happened when back in the 1970s, the UN went there and they had just decided to drill wells into the ground without doing the geological research. But to this day, people want things that are really functional and easy. So they don't necessarily want to put additional filters or any way that makes it more difficult to get the water. What they really want to do is just turn on the tap and have clean water come to you. No one likes habitual change. And so to reframe that into the world of Astreas, the idea is, how can you give someone something that requires the least amount of habitual change, but still ups your day? And I loved water, and I still do, because it is the purest, cleanest, and most optimal way to have better health. And yet, for us to have water that is good to drink, tastes amazing, and is optimized for you, we don't know in the Western world how difficult that is to attain in countries that don't have that set infrastructure. So that remains a core passion of mine, because for us to be able to drink water and forget how much it is in terms of our thriving, astronauts feel that all the time. In fact, astronauts, I think maybe you know, but they drink their own urine. Like, it's just something that's recycled and they have to drink it and you have to clarify it. And it's what we need to live. So the whole idea of food and beverage to me is find innovative ways to create something that will not just up your nutrition and performance, but also give you pleasure and, most importantly, very convenient and tasty. So that's really at the core. And I suppose in many ways, I haven't moved that far away from my love of food and beverage, just looking at it through creative endeavors. When I was at Palantir, one of my favorite things was we had phenomenal food, just amazing options to eat. And one of the reasons the company supported that is because they knew that for our brains to be at the peak performance, we needed to be well fed, well rested, well taken care of.
Beautifully said, and it's a beautiful sentiment and a reality that people who are well fed typically work better. So and especially in the whether it's small, medium, big companies, if people are well fed, they're going to be more productive. They're going to be happier. They don't have to leave. They don't have to spend their money. We could go on and on. I want to come back. I want to come back to the earlier discussion. And your company just won or recently won an award with the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge. Tell us a little bit about that, and that's tremendously important.
Yeah, so we had won phase one for the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge. For that, we'd paired together with Aleph Farms that actually does 3D printed meat. And the idea behind it was, again, to have a savory food item that you could present to astronauts. So while Astreas truffles are a high-end chocolate truffle, that concept was that we could take 3D printed meat and then cook it in a zero gravity sous vide to actually present a whole meal. And so another product line that we have in development is something savory. I love that you mentioned mushrooms, by the way, because for us, we really think that there is a lot that could be done with mycelium, whether it's lion's mane mushroom or another variant. I think for me, the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge phase one was an optimal way to say, you know what, there's a lot of innovation that can be done in food, and there are many other product lines that we can go into. So pairing with Aleph Farms was great because, again, they're a tremendous company. And I find it to be most impactful when you're working with people from different parts of the world that have a different flavor balance and a different flavor profile. So, for example, Japanese food, JAXA is known to have some of the best offerings for astronauts because they include in their food things like umami, so that there's another heightened level of pleasure with what you're eating. And many people forget that what we consider to be taste is actually a very complex sensation of flavors that are determined by your brain. So about 85% of what you think is taste on your tongue is actually olfactory. It's what you're smelling. And so with the Japanese, they use wasabi. With desis, we use chili pepper and all these other ways to have trigeminal stimulation, which means that even if externally you can't necessarily smell things, to open up that olfactory passage using things like cinnamon, wasabi, spice, menthol, and that really is what heightens flavor. So during COVID, a lot of people said they couldn't taste anymore, but really it meant they couldn't smell. So they kept putting salt on everything. And so to actually balance out a way of creating savory food that isn't so heavy on the salt, but has much more complexity in the flavor profile through different textures and ingredients. That's something we've done through Astreas, where we don't have a lot of sugar, but it still tastes exquisite. And for the savory, again, that was the road to take. So the NASA Deep Space Food Challenge was a great way to enable us to explore alternatives in the savory, and we will be continuing to do that. In fact, we're looking very heavily into mushrooms because it's an exquisite option that gives you both protein as well as other benefits, as you've previously touched on when it comes to lion's mane.
I mean, it's I think just the thinking is so progressive. I love it. And I hope I'm saying it correctly, Astreas. Astreas aims to fuel cosmic exploration. I guess, what do you see the role of the company and the food in building a community on Earth around space exploration, and how does that translate?
I love that you said community because that's one of my favorite words. I mean, the space community is so small, but it's such a joyful community where we all kind of help each other and plug in. We're kind of in that next wave of space exploration. In the past, there was this great, I would say it was a rivalry, but at the same time, it fueled human exploration when it came to the Russians or the USSR and the US. Have you ever seen For All Mankind? It's a great show on Apple TV.
I haven't. I'll write that down.
It's a wonderful one. It kind of shows what would have happened if USSR had gone to space first. And right now, I think with the commercialization of space, it really opens up a whole new horizon. So for us, I look to space as a point of inspiration. You can break down so many boundaries when you're forced to innovate in a way that hasn't been done before. A lot of people forget what space innovation has actually done for us. So when I first gave birth, I was still working on Astreas, and my son was in the neonatal intensive care unit. So I couldn't hold him and I couldn't give him breast milk at the very beginning. So he was given baby formula. And all baby formula has actually been enriched with DHA and ARA that were created in space. There were scientists who were looking at a way of using algae to mimic the same fatty acids that you have in breast milk, which is great for brain development. And so that was really technology that was created in space and brought back to Earth. So for us, when I talk about the idea of community, it's looking at the core of food in a very, very different way. We often forget that colonization started because of the spice trade. People wanted to have tasty food and they needed spices. They needed a way to uplift the palate. And that's what opened up that whole world. And so when it comes to the future, I think if I were to believe that we have a possibility of thriving in Mars, there needs to be food that is going to help people grow. And if you take the right spices on your ship, if you create a way of not just saying, look, we're going to grow our lettuces and, we'll take some freeze-dried food, you have to change that whole mindset. You need a chef on board the ship, you need the right spices, and then you open up uncharted territories. Similarly, here in America, I love my New York pizza. New York pizza is very different from Italian pizza, but that's because there's been an evolution when it comes to the whole palate. So the community on Earth, and what I would love for Astreas to have, is a sense of bringing together different palates, different flavor profiles, different tastes, but then creating food that is, again, optimized in terms of performance. It has more to do with how well you feel after you eat it, but also pleasure. I love my junk food. I love my McDonald's. I like the $1.50 hot dogs from Costco. They taste great. They make me feel terrible and heavy. And we want food that does the complete opposite. You crave it because your brain feels happy when you think about it, but then the after effects are the polar opposite. It actually helps you lift you. And so to have that built around a company, our mission is really to help us as humans excel and find that elite performer in all of us. We all have the top ability in particular terrains of our life. And I think to have food that just fuels that exploration of discovering who you are is where it's at.
I mean, it's beautifully stated, and I can't do anything to make it better, so we'll leave it at that. But let me ask you this question: if an astronaut had to pick just one Astreas product for their space journey, which one would you pick and why?
Well, right now, our flagship product is the chocolate truffle. And I would pick this one currently because chocolate is so universally loved. One of our directors from our board, Vicki Cloris, she was the former head of NASA Food Lab. And she has said often that astronauts, no matter where they're from, always love their chocolates. In fact, I think Astreas is such a loved product because it also weaves in that element of childhood nostalgia. But a product we're working in for a future line is actually one of my favorites, which is a dumpling. Because I think all cultures have dumplings. It's just like a carb around some kind of a protein. So I love my meat samosas, but then you have pierogies. And I think to be able to offer a savory dumpling that you bite into it and it's juicy and delicious and filled with protein inside, but the outside has an element of just carb comfort. That's something that has always been in my mind in terms of a savory option. One of the surgeons who's been tremendous supporter of Astreas, Bindu, she came up to me and she said, hey, is there an Indian desi version, like maybe a samosa to send up in space? I'm like, well, we're working on it. Something that is not going to crumb, will be shelf stable, and will pack all of the flavor, texture, and performance element. So yeah, that's Astreas truffles for now, which is an energy sphere, but in the future, a delicious savory dumpling of sorts.
And what's interesting is that when I left India in the late 80s, there was one place in Calcutta that you could get momos or dumplings.
Yeah.
Now, I've spent 6 months in the last 2.5 years in Calcutta, and dumplings or momos specifically are everywhere, everywhere. So, and apparently they're all over India now too. But I love
have you had the gatti roll in?
Of course, yes. In fact, the video that I'm going to send you of my son and I's little eating tour in Calcutta, he eats a gatti roll for the first time.
Oh, they're the best. So when my husband came back from Kolkata, he showed me how to make a gati roll. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. It's the desi version of a sandwich, right? It's just like a simple sandwich, but with layers and layers of flavors and textures. And it's just like a flavor bomb in your mouth. I love that because, again, it comes back to the idea of convenient food that is a joy to share. Because the first thing you did is you talked about your son, food tour, gati roll. You're not sitting there having a 5-course meal at an elegant restaurant. I love that, but that's not what you do when you're on the go and exploring. You need something that's quick and brings you pleasure and joy. So you've nailed it right there. And the reason instead of a gati roll, I'm thinking of dumpling is you kind of want it to be a 1-2 bite sensation, because a gati roll, even though it is still a sandwich type, it is a little bit more involved to eat. One thing I love though, for us, mindfulness is a very important part of our journey. So I think, especially in North America, we tend to just eat in front of our screen. You just kind of gobble it down. I remember I'm from Canada and Toronto. I was working with a startup, and one of my colleagues, he's Italian, he's like, let's go out for lunch. So no, I'm just going to sit here and eat. It's like, no, you can't do that. And he took me out for a 1-hour lunch, and I felt really guilty because I need to be productive, until I realized that if you just invest a little time in yourself when you're eating, it sets you up for success. But we don't have an hour to sit down and enjoy a lavish lunch. It's a very European lifestyle. But how can you give yourself just 5 minutes? And so that's what we aim for. Give yourself quality time, even if it's a smaller period of time. So instead of gobbling down your food, you actually have that moment to yourself.
That's amazing. And Shahreen, I want to say that for our listeners, how can they learn more about all this amazing work you're doing?
So we are going to be launching this April. And if you go to Astreas.com, you'll be able to find out much more. And I think for me, I love engaging with new consumers who try our product and give us feedback. And that's one of the things that's happened, where the evolution of Astreas has come from a lot of feedback from users in terms of, hey, have you thought of this? Originally, we had a product that had 100% RD of all your key multivitamins and your micronutrients. But then we had another product that had a lot of the energy to set you up. And our users were like, can we put both in one? So now we have all of it in one, called the Astreas Ultra. So yeah, if you hop onto our website, we also have our LinkedIn, Astreas, that would be a great place to start. For me, what's most exciting, I think, is understanding the needs of people like us. I'm a mom. I don't have a lot of time, but I love food. I think coming into January, it's me and the rest of the world where we've put on 15 pounds and you feel sluggish and awful, and we have these great aspirations. It's now February 21st, and most people just drop off the bandwagon. It's like, well, how can you help yourself still feel good while you're pushing on? And the idea is, instead of munching on dry kale, have something that gives you joy and pleasure, and let us know what we can do to give you more of that.
Love it. I love the open-endedness. I love the, desire to hear feedback. And frankly, as a joyful person, chocolate is a part of my journey. And to hear about, not just in name token sort of like, hey, this has got this or that attitude. There's a lot of science behind it, and that joy is baked or recipe'd into it is just lovely. So we're so excited to follow your exploits, literally, and hear about what comes next. Thank you so much. And I want to say that one of the things I love to do with our founders is to thank them, not just for coming on the show, but for doing what they're doing to make the world better. And in your case, never mind making the world better. I mean, I think you're the first guest I'm going to say you might be making the galaxy better.
You're still eating all the way through to the final frontier.
That's so cool. And, thank you again. We'll look forward to reconnecting with you and a future collaboration. So thank you, everyone, for listening. And check out Astreas.com. This has been another episode of the Firebelly Social Show. Thank you to Shahreen Reza for being amazing and for coming on the show. And don't forget to follow, click, do all the fun stuff. And we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Firebelly Social Show.
Thanks for listening to the Firebelly Social Show. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.